Hey hikers, Lee with Trailside Fitness. In today's video, I'm going to give you my top tips to be successful on your thru hike. Stay tuned. With thru hiking not being a very inexpensive sport, you have to figure $2 to $4 per mile depending on your hiking style. And then the time and difficulty it is to leave work, family, friends, home, pets, all that stuff behind while you go down these hikes. It makes sense you want to give yourself the best possible chance for success. I've worked with a lot of clients that have hiked numerous trails in the US, these long distance trails, a lot of international trails as well. I've got a pretty good success rate. You can learn more about that at the link up above. So one thing I want to make sure that I pass along to you guys is some of my top tips to make sure that your hike is successful as well and that you finish happy and healthy. For me, the absolute most important thing you can do before you leave for your hike is to train. Training is the best tool that you've got to physically prepare your body, and then through that training you build confidence, which helps with the mindset side of things, so it all kind of ties in together. The more fit you are starting your hike, the less risk of injury you have. With the better base of fitness, general overall level of physical preparedness, or GPP we call it, your body has less risk of injury. It can handle and buffer the stresses of hiking daily much better than a body that hasn't trained. If you've trained, that means you also have a lowered risk of overuse injuries, which are super common on long distance hikes and end way more hikes than most other reasons out there. In fact, injuries are typically the number one reason outside of maybe fires or finances for the reasons hikers aren't able to complete their hike. Outside of training, one of the more important things you can do to reduce injury risk even further is to start smart. I actually wrote an article for Backpacker Magazine about this. I'm going to link it down below. And I kind of walk through what to look for based on your training frequency and helping you determine what kind of mileage you might want to start with. So for example, if your longest training hike was 18 miles, you'll want to start roughly 20% less for your mileage and keep it in that range for maybe 10 to 14 days and then bump up a little bit from there. This helps your body adapt to the trail itself. Your body gets used to carrying a pack, doing the miles. You can kind of assess how you're recovering, and it's a much more gentle way of starting than going out the gate and trying to push for longer miles, trying to push the pace. There's no reason to do that, and if that's your mindset, you're most likely going to end up sidelined with an injury that could have easily been avoided, and it may actually end your hike. So pack weight is also a concern, and sometimes it's going to be a little bit out of your hands. For example, if you're hiking the Pacific Crest Trail, there may be poor water sources that year, or if you got to do a long section with the heavy carry. In those instances, you may be carrying 4 or 5 liters of water to make sure that you've got enough to dry camp and then continue on the next day to the next water source. Not much you can do in those situations, and typically the first week of any thru hike, most hikers will overpack what they need. And within the first 100 to 200 miles, you're quickly figuring out what you don't need and sending those items back home, which I would strongly suggest. There's no need to carry additional weight and items for gear that you're not using. That does add additional stress to your body. So I'm by no means saying you need to go ultralight or anything like that. Be comfortable, feel safe, but recognize that we also pack for our fears, and that means we're probably carrying extra gear that we don't need, and that's an opportunity to shed some weight and thereby some stress to our body. The other thing I'll say about pack weight is, in the end, it doesn't really matter. Your pack can be heavier as long as you're hiking fewer miles and you're listening to your body, making sure you're working within your capacity. So even if you do have a heavier pack, that's totally fine. If that's the gear you can afford and the gear that you're comfortable with, there's no problem with that. Take that gear and use it, but understand you may need to adjust your mileage and your body may need a different time frame to build up and be able to handle the stress of carrying the heavier pack for the miles and the terrain up ahead. A lot of this will also be dependent upon your training schedule and what that looked like leading into your hike. Nutrition is also really important for hikers, and it can feel a little overwhelming sometimes to dip into the nutrition side. Now, on my 2018 PCT hike, I really focused on eating as healthy as I could. I was actually interviewed by a journalist with REI. You can read that article linked below. But for most hikers, I would recommend you go through Erin at Backcountry Foodie. She has some amazing resources on her website. A lot of content and specifics for long distance hikers. All of her recipes, she runs through a little program, so she makes sure she's got the right amount of calories, fat, and protein, which is going to help you reduce inflammation, maintain nice, consistent energy throughout the day, and then recover at the end of the day as well, so you're ready for the next day's climb. So definitely recommend checking out Erin at Backcountry Foodie. Outside of that, focus on as many vegetables and fruits as you can in town, and then focus on the healthier options that you can while you're hiking, and that should make a huge difference overall. Self-care is another area that has a compounding effect if you're doing it consistently throughout the hike. Now, for me, this means at every rest stop, I'm doing some specific recovery routines while I'm eating, just to help those next few miles feel easier, to help my body feel good. And I can kind of target some of the areas that for me tend to get a little sore or uncomfortable, calves and feet most often. So I'll focus on those. Once I get to camp, I've got a specific camp routine that I like to go through. It's a little more in depth. I've got both those videos actually linked. I'll put the playlist link up here for you so you can check that out. But this self-care piece is super important. It helps you kind of check in with your body, understanding areas that maybe feel like they need a little more attention versus others. Instead of just taking ibuprofen, covering it up, or ignoring it, there are some really actionable things you can do to decrease that pain and discomfort and keep your hike healthy and keep you on trail longer. Now, there's one other thing you can do if you're having issues out on the trail, and that's reach out to Morgan at Blaze Physio. Morgan is fantastic at working with hikers, diagnosing issues that are going on, giving you some actionable things that you can do while you're hiking to help keep you out on the trail. She's awesome at diagnosing what's going on for you. It doesn't matter what trail you're on. She can do virtual sessions as well. And she'll make sure that you have the right resources and tools that you need to keep going forward. And if she feels like maybe it's time that you take a pause and work on some recovery, she'll pass along that information as well. Morgan is the best when it comes to working with hikers and keeping you healthy out on the trail. Last but not least is the mindset piece. So clients that work with me, I have a mindset coach come in at certain times of the year to work with my long distance hikers to make sure they've got the tools and resources they need mentally to stay healthy on the trail. Now, in addition to that, I would highly recommend Zach Davis and Carly Marie's book. This one's on the Pacific Crest, so Pacific Crest Trials. There's an Appalachian Trail version as well. Same book, they just changed the names to be more trail specific. But this book has some great questions to ask yourself, some great guiding activities to make sure that you're understanding your why for doing the hike, which is really important. I made a video about how to stay motivated in your training and having some specific goals to work toward. This book is going to help you in that same fashion, understand what this hike means to you and how you can use that to stay motivated while you're out on the trail and maybe navigate some of the challenges that do come up for you. So definitely recommend some mindset work. This book is super easy and accessible. There's often a Kindle version, and then I think the paperback version is good as well because I like to scribble and write in there myself. So definitely check that out. Well, that's going to wrap up today's video. There's 5 or 6 things in there on how to stay successful, some of my top tips and things that I've seen in working with hikers over the years. My clients have a really high success rate, so if you're interested in also having a high success rate, reach out to me. I want to work with you to make sure you've got a program that's going to fit your training needs to get you ready for whatever adventure you've got coming up. With that, we'll say happy trails.